If you close your eyes and picture the very first moment a human ancestor stood up and walked on two legs, what do you see?
Probably a lush African forest,
Mm.
or maybe the edge of a sprawling savanna.
Right, exactly. If you are like most people, you are picturing Africa. It's, a foundational piece of trivia most of us pick up in grade school. The human story, the origin of upright walking, is exclusively an out-of-Africa narrative.
That has been the unquestioned baseline for decades.
But what if the very first chapters of that story weren't written in Africa at all? Welcome to today's deep dive, where we are taking everything you thought you knew about human origins and turning it completely upside down.
It really is a monumental day in the scientific community when a single piece of evidence forces us to reconsider the timeline of our own evolution.
Oh, absolutely.
And the evidence we are looking at today is truly extraordinary because it challenges our understanding of geography just as much as it challenges biology.
We're pulling from a groundbreaking new scientific paper published literally today, March 4th, 2026, in the journal Paleobiodiversity and Paleoenvironments.
Which is an incredibly rigorous publication.
It is. And the mission of our deep dive today is to explore a newly detailed 7.2-million-year-old thighbone discovered in Bulgaria. It's a single fossil that might just rewrite the entire human origin story.
Okay, let's unpack this. We need to set the scene for you.
We do.
Imagine you are in southern Bulgaria in a fossil locality known as Azmaka 6. Researchers uncover a fossilized right femur.
Accessioned officially as FM3549AZM6.
Right, it's a thigh bone. But it's not just any bone. It is 7.2 million years old. Tell us why that specific age is causing such a massive stir right now.
To understand the weight of that 7.2 million year mark, we really have to look at the conventional, widely accepted timeline of human bipedalism.
Right.
For a long time, the earliest confirmed evidence of a human ancestor walking upright belonged to a species called Orrorin, found in Kenya.
And that dates back to what, about 6 million years? Roughly 6 million years, yes.
Yes.
Now, there is also Sahelanthropus, found in Chad, which dates to around 7 million years ago. But its status as a true upright walker is highly disputed.
Right, because a lot of researchers argue its femur looks much more like an ape that spent its time in the trees.
Exactly. So the established narrative has been firmly rooted in Africa, around that 6 million year mark. But this Bulgarian bone dates to 7.2 million years ago. It places it right at a crucial geological boundary known as the Tortonian-Mycenaean transition.
I'm guessing that is a period of massive change.
That is putting it mildly. The Tortonian-Mycenaean transition was a time of immense, volatile shifts in the Earth's climate. The Mediterranean region was undergoing extreme cooling and drying. What's fascinating here is the environmental context of this discovery.
Because it wasn't found in a jungle, right?
No, not at all. This femur wasn't found in a lush jungle or a dense forest. The Azmaka 6 locality has yielded over 2,000 fossils, and this early human ancestor was found alongside the remains of mastodons, ancient rhinos, giraffes,
Wow.
and early horses.
That paints such a vivid picture. It sounds less like an ancient jungle and more like a modern-day safari park.
The scientific term for it is a Tyrolean savanna. But in plain English, we are talking about open bush and dry, wooded grassland. It was a completely non-forested setting. The dense canopy that apes traditionally relied on for safety and food was virtually non-existent there.
Let's bring this down from the grand, sweeping landscapes to the actual individual. Help us visualize who this bone actually belonged to. When we are looking at this 7.2-million-year-old femur, who was walking around on it.
Based on the physical characteristics of the bone and the time frame it comes from, the researchers have tentatively attributed this femur to a species called K.F. Greekopithecus,
Okay.
and they actually believe it was likely a female. We already knew a bit about Greekopithecus from a jawbone found in neighboring Greece that dates to almost the exact same time period.
One thing I found incredible in the sources is that we actually have a pretty solid estimate of her size.
They do.
I mean, how on earth do you get a weight estimate from a single fossilized leg bone?
It really comes down to physics and scaling. The researchers looked specifically at the dimensions of the femur, focusing on the size of the femoral head.
Think of that as the ball part of the ball and socket hip joint.
Exactly. Because that joint has to bear the mechanical load of the body, its size scales very predictably with body mass. They compared these measurements to modern chimpanzees, which have a similar scaling ratio.
And what did the math say?
The estimates consistently put this individual at around 23 to 24 kilograms.
So we are talking about 50 to 53 pounds. For the listener trying to picture that, it is roughly the size of a modern Dalmatian or a large spaniel.
But obviously, this was an upright walking primate.
Right. And the world she was walking through, this Azmaka region, wasn't just a generic grassy plain. We are talking about the Amatovo Formation in the Upper Thrace Basin. The paper describes it as a floodplain of a braided river.
Under a semi-arid climate.
Yes, but my absolute favorite part of this entire study is how they figured out the ancient weather report. You mentioned this dry savanna earlier, but how do they actually know the climate was shifting 7 million years ago just from a bone?
The geological forensics are remarkable. You can learn a staggering amount about an ancient environment just from the dirt still attached to the fossils.
I was amazed to read that they figured this out from literal stains on the bone.
Yes, the researchers found manganese stains and these hardened carbonate crusts right there on the femur.
And the manganese stains only happen during wet, waterlogged conditions.
Correct. While the carbonate concretions form during baking hot and dry periods.
So 7.2 million years later, we know this 50-pound creature was living in a semi-arid climate with brutal, intense, seasonal wet and dry periods. It really reminds you that science is an ongoing, living detective story. The ground beneath our feet is holding on to secrets that can fundamentally change how we see our place in the world.
And the forensic work on the bone itself is where that detective work truly shines. A femur isn't just a piece of anatomy.
It's a mechanical lever.
Precisely. Its physical shape is entirely dictated by the forces applied to it during locomotion over a lifetime.
Let's get into those mechanics, because a bone is a structural engineering marvel. When you compare this Bulgarian femur to the femurs of tree-swinging apes, the first thing that jumps out is how straight the shaft is.
That is a critical distinction.
If you spend your life hanging from branches, your femur develops a curve. It acts almost like a bowed, flexible shock absorber. But this Azmaka femur is remarkably straight, much like a load-bearing architectural column. Here's where it gets really interesting. The paper introduces a highly specific, memorable detail about the neck of the femur. It's an acronym FNOL. Can you translate that for us?
Absolutely. FNOL stands for femoral neck oblique length.
Okay.
If you picture the femur, you have the long vertical shaft, and at the top, a neck that angles inward to connect to the spherical head, which then fits into the pelvis. The top edge of that neck is incredibly revealing. In this Azmaka femur, the medial part of this superior edge is elongated and noticeably straight, angling upward toward the head.
Why does that specific elongated shape matter so much to the researchers?
Because that specific shape provides a crucial biomechanical advantage for walking. You see it in early human ancestors and you see it in modern humans, but you absolutely do not see it in knuckle-walking apes like gorillas.
Or suspensory apes like orangutans.
Right, exactly. In those apes, that part of the neck is much shorter and concave. The elongated straight edge in an upright walker is designed to increase the distance between the hip joint and the muscles attaching to the outside of the hip.
It acts like a longer wrench.
That is a perfect analogy. It acts like a longer wrench, providing much better leverage for balancing your entire torso on one leg. And balancing on one leg, even for a fraction of a second, is a mandatory requirement for taking a walking step.
It is mathematical proof of posture, written right into the skeleton.
Yeah.
And they didn't just look at the outside of the bone. They took this fossil to the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology.
A look at the inside.
Right. They put it through a high-resolution micro-CT scan to examine the cortical bone thickness.
This is a brilliant way to determine how a creature moved. They were looking for something called FNCBD.
FNCBD, which stands for
femoral neck cortical bone distribution. Cortical bone is the dense, hard outer shell of the bone. In the neck of the femur, the thickness of this shell responds directly to the physical loads placed on it.
So if you are hanging from trees...
If you are a suspensory ape, spending your time hanging beneath branches, gravity is pulling on your hip joint relatively evenly in multiple directions. Consequently, a CT scan of a chimpanzee's femoral neck shows cortical bone that is relatively symmetrical in thickness all the way around.
But when you stand up and walk on two legs, gravity becomes a completely different ballgame.
That is the critical difference. When you walk upright, your entire body weight pushes down on the femoral head while the ground pushes back up through the shaft.
That sounds like a lot of pressure.
It creates a massive stereotypical bending stress on the neck of the femur. To handle that immense load without snapping, the bone adapts. It deposits much thicker cortical bone on the bottom side of the neck and leaves much thinner bone on the top side.
So it's asymmetric, thick on the bottom, thin on top. And when they CT scanned this 7.2-million-year-old Bulgarian femur, the results were undeniable.
The scan showed a clearly asymmetric distribution. Despite some natural fossilization wear and tear, the imaging proved that the dense bone is thickest on the bottom and thins out significantly on top.
Wow.
It perfectly matches the asymmetric pattern we see in modern humans and early confirmed upright walkers. It is distinctly different from the homogeneous symmetrical distribution found in great apes today.
So the inside of the bone proves it was bearing vertical weight like a pillar. But bones don't move on their own. They are pulled by muscles. And that brings us to the real heavy lifter of upright walking, the gluteus maximus.
The main butt muscle.
Exactly. The researchers paid very close attention to a feature called the gluteal tuberosity.
The gluteal tuberosity is a roughened ridge on the back surface of the femur, just below the hip joint. It is the primary anchor point for the gluteus maximus, which happens to be the largest muscle in the human body.
And the exact position and shape of this attachment point tell us precisely how that muscle was being utilized.
They do.
I imagine it is used very differently depending on whether you are trying to climb a massive oak tree or just walking across a flat plain.
The mechanics are entirely different. In African apes, the gluteus maximus sits further back on the anatomy. Its main job for them is powerful extension of the hip.
Pulling the leg backward.
Right, pulling the leg backward, which is crucial for climbing vertically up tree trunks or pushing off from a four-legged stance. But the Azmaka femur lacks the anatomical structures that support that posterior backward pulling position.
Instead, it has a vertical attachment point positioned more on the side of the bone.
That lateral positioning changes everything. Because the attachment point is shifted, it means the bulk of the gluteus maximus muscle was traversing the hip laterally. In an upright walker, the gluteus maximus doesn't just pull the leg back. A huge portion of it acts to stabilize the pelvis from the side.
Think about the mechanics for a second. When you lift one foot off the ground to take a step, your torso naturally wants to collapse toward the side with no support.
Yes, and the lateral firing of the gluteal muscles is what prevents that collapse, locking your pelvis level so you don't fall over.
Because the attachment point for the muscle is arranged vertically and laterally on this fossil, it means this creature was actively fighting gravity in a uniquely upright way. The anatomy is practically screaming biped.
It really is.
But the researchers wanted to be absolutely certain they didn't just eyeball these ridges and call it a day. They fed the data into an advanced statistical model.
They utilized a statistical tool designed to find patterns in highly complex data sets. They ran a principal components analysis, or PCA.
On 12 different linear measurements, right?
Yes. The researchers took 12 distinct measurements of the bone, things like the width of the head, the height of the neck, that critical elongated FNOL measurement we discussed earlier. They fed all of this into a massive database containing the measurements of modern humans, modern apes like gorillas and chimpanzees, and a wide array of extinct ancestors.
The algorithm then plots all of these specimens on a graph based purely on their structural similarities. The suspensory, tree-swinging apes grouped together in one area, the knuckle walkers grouped together in another. So when the computer finally plotted the 7.2-million-year-old femur, where did it land?
The math dropped the Bulgarian bones squarely into the exact same cluster as the earliest known upright walkers.
That is wild.
It grouped closely with established hominins and positioned itself completely away from the suspensory tree-climbing apes. It represents a transitional form of bipedalism, sure, but its metrics unequivocally tie it to creatures that walk the earth on two legs.
So what does this all mean? Let's take a step back. We have a 7.2-million-year-old femur from Bulgaria. It has the straight, load-bearing shaft of a walker. It has the elongated neck and asymmetric bone thickness of a creature supporting its vertical weight against gravity.
It has the muscular attachment points required to stabilize a walking pelvis.
And a massive statistical database firmly clusters it with human ancestors. We are talking about a primate walking upright in the Balkans, hundreds of thousands of years before the earliest disputed evidence of upright walking in Africa.
It fundamentally challenges the geographic consensus of the past century. For decades, the dominant hypothesis among paleoanthropologists has been that bipedalism evolved in the forests or the woodland edges of Africa.
The traditional narrative was that as the African climate changed and the dense forests shrank, our ancestors were forced out onto the expanding savannas. They stood up to see over the tall grass, or perhaps to carry food across open ground.
But this fossil completely bypasses that map. It is sitting in an open, dry, wooded grassland in the eastern Mediterranean. That is well over 1,000 miles away from those famous African sites, and the timeline predates them.
Which is just staggering when you really think about it.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the authors of the paper are proposing a radical new dispersal hypothesis.
Let's get into that.
During this period in the late Miocene, the eastern Mediterranean was experiencing extreme climatic and environmental volatility. The region was drying out rapidly. The thick, sheltering forests were retreating, being replaced by the very open, harsh savanna environment we see preserved in the Azmaka fossil record.
That would be a terrifyingly tough place to be a tree-swinging ape, especially if the trees you rely on for food and safety are vanishing.
It is pure survival. The environmental stress in the Balkans and Anatolia may have been the very catalyst that forced these early primates to adapt to a terrestrial life. To survive in an open environment with dwindling tree cover, they had to figure out how to move efficiently across the ground to find resources.
So bipedalism may have evolved right there in the open plains of Eurasia entirely as a survival mechanism against a punishing, drying climate.
Exactly. And then, the ultimate twist, they moved.
Down into Africa.
That is the core of the hypothesis. As the environment in Europe continued to shift and potentially worsen, the descendants of this Azmaka primate, these early transitional upright walkers, may have actually dispersed from Eurasia into Africa.
Driven by the climate.
Yes. The intercontinental land bridges of the time would have allowed for this massive migration. Once they arrived in Africa, they may have encountered more hospitable, or at least highly varied, mosaic settings. That relocation could have sparked the evolutionary radiation of the later African hominins we are so familiar with, like the famous Australopithecus fossil Lucy.
I want to make sure we clarify this for the listener because it is a massive paradigm shift. The out-of-Africa theory for the origin of our specific species, Homo sapiens, is still incredibly solid.
Absolutely solid.
We know anatomically modern humans evolved in Africa and spread outward across the globe much, much later in history. But what we are talking about here today is the origin of the hominin lineage itself, the very first step on the path to becoming human. And that story might actually be an inter-African narrative.
It separates the mechanical evolution of bipedalism from the much later evolution of the genus Homo. It suggests that walking on two legs is a significantly older and geographically distinct biological innovation than we previously recognized. This raises an important question about how we view the fossil record as a whole.
Because we might be looking in the wrong places.
We often suffer from sampling bias in science. We tend to find fossils in the places where the geological conditions are perfect for preserving them, and quite frankly, in the places where we dedicate the most funding to look. Africa has a rich, incredibly well-researched fossil record for this period.
While the Balkans, on the other hand, are really only just beginning to reveal their ancient secrets.
Exactly.
It really makes you wonder what else is buried under a random hillside in Bulgaria or Greece, just waiting to flip another textbook upside down. Let's summarize the key takeaways for you as you process everything from today's deep dive. We are looking at a 7.2-million-year-old femur from Bulgaria.
Despite being older than the earliest accepted African bipeds, it boasts undeniable bipedal biomechanics.
It has an elongated straight neck to provide walking leverage. It has asymmetric bone thickness built to carry vertical weight. It has an anchor point positioned specifically to stabilize a walking pelvis. And it lived in a completely open, non-forested savanna.
And critically, because of its extreme age and its unexpected location, it provides compelling evidence that the earliest origins of upright walking may not have occurred in the shrinking forests of Africa at all. It may have started in the drying, open landscapes of the ancient Mediterranean, which eventually prompted a later massive migration down into the African continent.
Having these nuanced, cutting-edge facts in your back pocket is so valuable. It gives you a much richer, multi-perspective understanding of human history. Science isn't a stagnant list of facts you memorize once. It is a dynamic, constantly updating map.
It really is.
The next time someone brings up the origins of upright walking, you can point out that the map might actually need to be recentered on the Balkans. It shows how a single bone, analyzed with modern CT scans and robust algorithms, can challenge an entire century of established thought.
It is a phenomenal reminder of how interconnected life is with the world around it. It leaves us with a rather profound reflection on evolution itself. The paper strongly suggests that the very first steps of our ancient ancestors were not a choice, but an absolute necessity.
They were forced out of the trees and onto 2 feet by a rapidly drying climate and a drastically shifting landscape.
It was a brutal mandate, adapt to the ground, or perish.
It was an evolutionary leap driven entirely by extreme climate stress.
Which brings us to a crucial thought for today. If our ancient ancestors were forced to undergo such a fundamental structural biological change in response to regional climate shifts millions of years ago, we must ask ourselves, what fundamental adaptations, whether they be biological, societal, or technological, might humanity be forced to undergo in response to the drastic global climate shifts we are beginning to face right now? Evolution is never truly finished. It is always an ongoing conversation with the environment.
A conversation that started 7.2 million years ago with a single upright step. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the maps, and we will catch you next time.